Dear California, we know these are challenging times. Rest assured, you are not alone. We've all had to adapt. And with summer here, your energy bills might go up with rising temperatures. Together, we can save energy and money. Try closing your shades during the day, setting your AC to 78 or higher, or cooling off with a fan when you can. United, we are always stronger. Stay well, California, and keep it golden.
Welcome everybody to today's session. We are going to have a lot going on today. Another session in energy conservation with San Diego Gas and Electric at 6 and El Cafecito gift card if you stay with us today. All right, the presenters here today are authors. So welcome everybody. Thank you for being here with us today. We're gonna go ahead and I'm gonna go ahead and introduce everybody person at a time. Everybody's gonna be able to have a time to speak and we are gonna be able to hear their stories. All right, well, but before that, let me actually just speak a little bit about the Cafecito gift card. Okay, so only during the live programming at the end of this session, we're gonna have El Cafecito gift card raffle. This card is basically for a location in Vista, California. So I'm sorry if you're watching in a different location, but if you ask questions to the presenters, you will be able to participate on this. Okay. For our presenters for today, we're gonna start with Debra Castaneda.
One of our first presenters today, Debra Castaneda, award-winning author of The Monsters of Chavez Ravine. She has lived in 5 states, but she is a Californian through and through. Raised in Monterey Park, she spent most weekends in Boyle Heights, listening to her grandmother's spooky stories. After a career as a radio and television journalist, she now devotes her time to writing stories of supernatural suspense. Her urban fantasy, The Monsters of Chavez Ravine, is an International Latino Book Awards winner. She has also written a series of young adult novels called Surviving Hillside, set in Northern California and featuring a teenage Latina heroine. When she is not at her computer, you can find her taking long walks, making Mexican food, binge-watching creepy shows, and texting her 2 daughters. She lives with her husband in Capitola, California. Find her online and read her short stories at debracastaneda.com.
All right. So, welcome, Debra, and welcome, everybody. Can you tell us your story, Debra?
Sure. I'm going to share my screen.
All right.
So you, everyone can see the cover of the book. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So this is my book. It's called The Monsters of Chavez Ravine, and it's an urban fantasy, but it's set in a very real place. And I wanted to start off telling you a little bit about that place. It holds a very special place in my heart. It's the area that most people know of Chavez Ravine, and it's made up of 3 old neighborhoods that no longer exist, Palo Verde, La Loma, and Bishop. And my mother and her entire family lived in Chavez Ravine and lived there until they, along with many of the other all the other residents, got eviction notices to make way for a low-income housing project, but the housing project never happened. And eventually, the city of Los Angeles sold the land to the owner of the Dodgers to build a new stadium. But just for the record, my family never held it against the team, and my mother did love her Dodgers. I set the story in 1952. The first letters for the evictions went out in 1950. 1952, only 200 people were left. And from the stories my family used to tell, it must have been really eerie up there, just, you know, them and the coyotes. And 200 people spread over 3 neighborhoods where thousands of families once lived. And so not only was it kind of a scary setting, I thought creepy, but also it was a history rife with conflict and a legacy of social injustice. So I used that as a backdrop to tell the story of my family, many of whom I used to base my characters very loosely on. So I wanted to introduce you to my family. On the left is my father. He's the one in the second row in the back. He's the guy with the cardigan, Boyle Heights. Some of these guys were white fence gang members my dad used to talk about. But anyway, it's his mother, my grandmother, that used to scare the heck out of me with the spookiest stories. I spent most weekends with her. So there was a strong culture of storytelling and the supernatural. My mother is off to the right. She's off to the far right. And that is a picture taken in front of the family house in the neighborhood of Palo Verde, where they own the family home. This is a really great picture. It's taken in La Loma at a well. My uncle, my mother, and some friends. And a key scene takes place. And so this picture really haunted me in all the years I'd had it in my position. So I put something really scary happening there. This was my mother. She's the tall one. The heroine in my book is also very tall. My mother was 5'8", her sister Lily, and the little boy is my cousin Eddie. He was born there and he lived in Palo Verde until he was about 10. But I'm going to tell you one thing about these families. My family, they were homeowners. They were very proud people. But the city, when they evicted the people, they called the area slums and blighted. I think my family was very ashamed and embarrassed to come from these neighborhoods that got splashed all over the headlines and called slums. So privately, they would talk about the evictions, but very rarely publicly. So the stories and their experience haunted them through their life, and it kind of haunted me. So instead of telling a nonfiction story, and of which there's plenty, about the history of Chavez Ravine, I decided to set it as a spooky story. I wanted to give my characters a chance to fight against something other than just the city, because that was going to be a losing battle. So I created monsters with which that they could fight against. And one of these is the Dogface Bride. There are many different creatures. This is one of them. And this is based on this terrifying story one of my grandmothers used to tell me. And so the basic gist of the story is a young girl, 22 years old, is forced to return to Chavez Ravine to help her ailing father, but gets pulled into this battle against the supernatural. And luckily, she's a sharpshooter and she's a smart gal. I thought I would be done with the stories of Chavez Ravine, but it turns out Chavez Ravine wasn't done with me. I had one more story to tell. One of the things that I grew up hearing about, or hearing about the films that were made in these old neighborhoods, and many Westerns and other kind of detective stories were filmed there. I love mystery stories and crime stories and the supernatural, so it's not too surprising that I combined everything for a ghost story and a crime story. And so this is the next story, but once again, it's drawing on the culture and the family influence. I do have a series of young adult books, and I really enjoyed writing these, but in the theme of all of my books, you'll find two. One is you'll find Mexican-American characters doing really interesting things in the lead roles, and journalism. I spent most of my career as a television journalist and a radio journalist. And believe it or not, I have a terror of public speaking. And so me having to be in a Zoom call talking on camera is kind of horrifying. I've only ever been behind the camera, although I have done some reporting work. And so I usually manage to slip in journalism into the stories. And the main character here is Samantha Reyes, desperately wants to be a reporter, but she's also terrified of public speaking. So this was something that was near and dear to my heart. So that is my last slide. And that is what I have. Thank you for letting me speak with you. And I look forward to your questions later.
Right. Thank you, Deborah, for sharing. Our next presenter, and allow me to share my screen here.
Our next presenter today, Donna Miscolta, award-winning author of Living Color Angie Rubio stories. This is her third book of fiction and was named to the 2020 Latino Books of the Year list by the Las Comadres and Friends National Latino Book Club. Next Generation Indie Book Award winner for multicultural fiction and an International Latino Book Awards Gold Medal for Best Collection of Short Stories. It was a finalist for the American Fiction Award, the Nancy Pearl Award, and the Washington State Book Award. Her previous story collection, Hola and Goodbye, Una Familia in Stories, won the Doris Backwin Award for Writing by a Woman, an Independent Publishers Award for Best Regional Fiction, and an International Latino Book Awards for Best Latino-Focused Fiction. Poet Rick Barrott called her first novel, When the De la Cruz Family Danced, intricate, tender, and elegantly written. Her website, donnamiscolta.com.
Okay, welcome, Donna. Can you tell us your story?
Yes, thank you, Anna. And I just want to say, Deborah, what a fantastic presentation that was. I loved the photos and I loved hearing the story about the place. So thank you very much. I am Donna Miscolta. I'm the author of 3 books of fiction. And I live in Seattle, Washington, though I grew up in National City, California, just south of San Diego. And I think at some deep level, I always wanted to be a writer, but I didn't acknowledge that desire until I was almost 40 years old. And I think it's not uncommon for kids of color to grow up not believing that they can be something related to the thing that they love, such as books and stories in my case. I think race and color are often barriers to achievement, and racism and colorism, aside from being part of our institutions and social system, also pervades our own families. So if a child is going to overcome constant messages of less than or know your place, she needs to observe and self-reflect and persevere in the belief in herself and her right to claim a space in the world. And this is basically what my 3rd book of fiction, Live in Color, Angie Rubio stories, is about. Each story considers an event in a particular year in Angie's life and how she, as a brown girl, is perceived by others, how she responds to those perceptions, and what she learns about the world and about herself. It's a book that is both funny and sobering. Funny because there's an absurdness about judging people on race and color. Sobering because such judgment damages the psyche and drains the soul. But the humorous and the dark often coexist, and including them both in fiction gives the characters and the situations dimensionality and depth, which I hope you will find in Living Color, Angie Rubio stories. This is a work of fiction, but it definitely draws on things I experienced or observed while growing up in the 60s and 70s. The first story takes place in Hawaii, where Angie is confused about who and where the Hawaiians are, especially as she sees her blonde neighbors and classmates wearing muumuus and grass skirts and taking hula lessons. It's her first incipient awareness, however nebulous, that the culture of first or indigenous peoples is being used in a superficial way. And after her family returns to California, she finds herself in Catholic school, where she learns about the tenuous line between truth and lies. And later in public school, she questions why she has been assigned to the so-called dumb class, which coincidentally is made up mostly of kids of color. Later in high school, though her skills and desires lie in writing, the only outlet is with the school newspaper, which is the domain of the popular kids, to which Angie does not belong. And so with each setback in each story, Angie becomes a little braver, a little more determined to break through the barriers and boundaries that have been imposed on her. It's a book of perseverance and hope, as much as a book about the obstacles a young brown girl faces and the humiliations and failures that she encounters in her efforts to claim space for herself. And I'm happy to say that this book has won 2 awards, including a gold medal from the International Latino Book Awards, and was a finalist for 3 other awards, which Anna mentioned. And I invite you all to learn more about me and my books at donnamiscolta.com, and especially invite you to take a look at the book trailer I made for the book, which includes drawings by my son-in-law. So it's a very special book trailer to me, and I hope that you will enjoy it too. So thank you for your time.
All right, thank you, Donna, for that information. Now let's go to into our next presenter for today.
Our next presenter, Gloria Arjona, author of Loteria. Her book explores the origins of the 54 images of Loteria El Gallo, created in the early 20th century by French immigrant Clemente Jacques, but greatly influenced by Mexican artist José Guadalupe Posada. The author highlights the racial and gender prejudices mirrored in these images and stresses the importance of the card calling during the game. Born in El Paso, Texas, and raised in Mexico City, Dr. Arjona teaches Spanish at California Institute of Technology. She is also a performer and an independent researcher with a special interest in Mexican culture and music from a gender and race perspective. She recently published Posadas and Calaveras, where she explores the narrative Day of the Dead tradition known as Literary Calaveras. Find her books at Amazon.com or bookshop.org.
Welcome,
Thank you.
Gloria.
Gracias. How is the volume? Okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And I'm going to share my screen. And actually, I kind of changed my mind. And because we are so close to Day of the Dead, and we have such a short, period of time, I'm going to share Posadas Unknown Calaveras. And these are both of my books are related because Posada is actually the creator of the first Mexican loterias. Okay, so most of the people know Posada because of the work of Posada they know is what they call La Catrina, which is a long story. Originally, it was called Calavera Garbancera. And it was Diego Rivera in this mural, in one of his murals. This is a detail of a mural where he gave a position of a character to Posada's calavera, skeleton. And Diego Rivera was the one who baptized this calavera as La Catrina. But okay, I am as you say, Anna, I am focusing on the narrative part of the work of José Guadalupe Posada, and as a consequence, the narrative part, the important narrative part of during the Mexican tradition of the Day of the Dead. Now, another, right here I put a brief definition of the Literary Calaveras, which are satirical verses composed as epitaphs, that is as if somebody had already died for a friend or famous people, and to highlight their defects or their qualities. And let me go to the next slide. Most of us as Mexicans Mexicans and non-Mexicans relate Day of the Dead tradition with our indigenous tradition, and of course every cultural aspect of Mexican and Mexican descendants has to do with our strong indigenous past. But the Literary Calaveras, and as a consequence, the work of Posada and the iconography of the Day of the Dead celebration dates back actually to medieval Europe, to what was known, these were allegories that came in the early 15th century, 16th century in Europe mostly in Germany, in England, in France, after the Black Death, La Peste Negra. And as everybody can see, these were representations of the dead. It's called La Danse Macabre, la Danza de la Muerte, death as a character and inviting people of different status, social status, to a dance. That dance is the death. The actual meaning of this dance was that we all die, no matter our social status, no matter our gender, no matter if we are rich or poor. La danza, la muerte es la gran democratizadora. The death is the great equalizer. And these are some representations of the 16th, 17th century. And then I connect in my book the work of Posada with that tradition. And these are some examples. Now, the title of the book is Posada's Unknown Calaveras, because the literary Calaveras are barely known, and Posada's narrative work is barely known, and also because this set of Calaveras that I am presenting are the less known work of Posada. So this is an example of one of these Calaveras that I recover in this book. They are in the original Spanish. Okay, I made the transcription from this to the Spanish and then to the English. Those of you who are poets know that it's very difficult to translate poetry, and more if it's humorous poetry. But I will read just a couple of them and then finish, because I know that we don't have too much time. And then if you have questions, you are welcome. I'm going to read this calavera. Es calavera el inglés. Calavera, sí señor. Calavera fue el francés y Fauré y Sadi Carnot. El chino, el americano, el papa y los cardenales, reyes, duques, concejales y el jefe de la nación, en la rumba son iguales. Calaveras del montón. That means that at the end we all are equal. And again, this is the main idea of the allegories that were created originally in Europe in the early 16th century, late 15th century, during the La Danse Macabre. And I don't know how much time I do have, because I know that I talk too much, so I will. Let me see the chat right here. Okay. Well, this is basically what I do. Let me read this for you, because some calaveras are just a word play. So with this I finish. El tamal, for those of you who speak Spanish, tamal, you know that is a dish, a Mexican dish, but also it sounds like está mal, like a contraction, the tamal, está mal, that's wrong. So Posada play with that idea. Hay un guiso nacional a quien puso no sé quién el feo nombre de tamal. Y mire usted que va y ven. Cuando el tamal no está bien, resulta que no está mal. Y en cambio, cuando está bien, es justo cuando está mal. Y si el tamal no está bien, el que lo come está mal. ¿Quién entiende este Belén de ese guiso nacional? So I hope I gave you a little taste of what are the literary calaveras and what I did in this work that I consider important of José Guadalupe Posada. Thank you. Gracias.
Oh, that was great. That was great, Gloria. And we're going to get into some questions afterwards. Now, let's go ahead and go with our next presenter for today.
Our next presenter is Ana Crespo, award-winning author of Lia and Luis, who has more. Originally from Brazil, Ana moved to the United States to pursue a Master's of Education degree. Here, she fell in love with children's books and became a writer. She is the author of several titles, including The Sock Thief, a soccer story, winner of an International Latino Book Award. She is happiest when surrounded by nature and spends her summers traveling around the U.S. and exploring some of the most beautiful places in America. from where she gets many ideas for new stories. She currently lives with her family in Colorado. More information at annacrespobooks.com.
All right. Welcome, Anna. Now, tell us a little bit about your story and your books.
Hi, Anna. Thank you so much. I like your name so much. It's so beautiful. Anyway, hi, everyone. Hello from Colorado. My name is Anna Crespo, and I am the author of 7 picture books with 2 more on the way. They include The Sock Thief, a soccer story, which Anna mentioned. It's a winner of a 2016 International Latino Book Award. And it's illustrated by Nina Gonzalez from Argentina and published by Albert Women and Company, and tells the story of this Brazilian boy who cannot afford a soccer ball and must use a few socks and a lot of creativity to solve his problem. The book is sprinkled with Portuguese words and shows a few animal sounds in Portuguese too, because when I first moved here, I had no idea that a dog said woof woof or a rooster said cock-a-doodle-doo in English. So in this book, the dog woofs ow, 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 and the rooster says cocorico. I am also the author of a book that just came out called Hello Tree. It's illustrated by Dow Pomeroy and published by Little Brown Books for Young Readers. It came out last month, actually, and it tells the story of the connection between a girl and a tree and the wildfire that threatens it. I met the girl when she was a baby and I was just a sapling. That's how the story begins. And it goes on for a span of about 30 years, showing the entire life cycle of a forest and the role of fire in it. But the reason I'm here today is because of Lia Luis, Who Has More, illustrated by fellow Brazilian Giovanna Medeiros and published by Charles Bridge. Lia Luis tells the story of Brazilian-American twins who use their mathematical thinking skills to figure out who has more snacks. The book is also sprinkled with Portuguese words because, like many children of immigrants, Lia and Luis are bilingual. This book is actually part of an incredible initiative by Charles Bridge and Turk and the Heising Simmons Foundation to bring to classrooms books that are created by diverse authors featuring diverse characters in stories with mathematical plots. So the series, if you can see here, is called Storytelling Math, and it features board books by Grace Lynn and picture books by a variety of authors and illustrators. I am actually originally from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and like many writers, I wasn't always a writer. But unlike most writers, I also was not always a reader. I didn't enjoy reading when I was a child, and I think a lot of it is because in Brazil, we don't have community libraries, or at least we didn't have them when I was growing up. And also because I remember associating reading with school work. We didn't have much freedom to choose the books that we wanted to read. So after finishing school and getting a degree in journalism while I was still in Brazil, my degree is from Brazil, I moved to the United States to attend graduate school. I got a degree in Korean technology education. And while I was in graduate school, my husband and I, we had our first child. And so because of that, that's when I started visiting the community libraries. And I remember going to story time and borrow, because we were graduate students, right? So everything that we had, we borrowed from the libraries. So we borrowed movies, we borrowed books for our child, we borrowed toys even. Right. And we attended the story time all the time. And one thing that I remember was is sitting down with my daughter at the children's area, reading books with her. And I still remember learning the word shovel. I had never heard the word shovel before, and I learned it from one of those baby's first words books. And eventually, of course, my daughter started to grow and her interest changed. But going to the library made me want to start reading. And so I picked up some children's books and got hooked very quickly with picture books, but also middle grade and YA, and just got hooked into reading, something that I hadn't experienced much before, unless I was forced to. And so anyway, and so that's how I fell in love with books. One thing that I noticed when I was in the library with my daughter was that there were so many books, but I'm sure there were some, but I never found any books featuring Brazilian characters, unless the characters were famous soccer players, nonfiction books about famous soccer players. Then those books were there. So anyhow, it took me about 10 years since the time that my daughter was young and going to the library with me almost every day to actually develop the desire to write books. But I think when that came about, that lack of books featuring kids like my kids was still in the back of my mind. And so anyhow, so I ended up joining a professional organization. I learned that I had a lot to learn, and got to work and ended up publishing The Sock Thief, which was my first book. And you can find out more about myself and about my books, and about the origin stories for the books and etc. at annacrespobooks.com. So that's all I have. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Well, now everybody, you can all join in back again. And thank you, Anna. Thank you, all of you, for being here and taking the time to sharing your stories. If for everybody who's watching, please, you can go ahead and ask your questions in the chat. We can go ahead and the presenters can answer them. So as those questions are coming in, I do have some questions for the presenters. So I'm gonna go in the order that they presented. So first of all, for Deborah, I find very interesting as I hear about your books and your stories and where you're getting a little bit of where the stories are coming from, basically from the beginning. Actually, like some of those, the mystery stories, supernatural, even though it doesn't look like it, but I like the scary stuff. But I think it's a very divided genre, since there's people who enjoy them and people who don't want to hear about it or watch them because of the scary feeling. So how do you get some of these ideas for writing the stories for your, like, for example, your current book?
Okay, so the ideas sometimes will just pop into my head. For example, when I read that there were only 200 people left in Chavez Ravine in 1952, I was like, oh my gosh, I could imagine myself there. I would be terrified. That would be so scary, such an abandoned place. And then I added in the monsters. So sometimes it'll start off with a snippet and then it becomes a full-blown story for me very quickly. But I have a lot of little backstories in my pocket, and also some little snippets. Like, I'm really into urban legends and cryptids. So, for example, there's one story that I have set in a forest in Utah, the Root Witch, and it's a real forest called Panda. And it's a scary concept of a single clone aspen forest where all the trees are a clone of each other. And to me, that just sounded so incredibly spooky. And I love urban legends, so I created an urban legend for it. And then I just added in the journalist and then had the crew go missing, which is every producer's nightmare, that you assigned a crew when people told you not to send the crew out, but you know it's a good story, so you just blow everybody off and you send them and then they die. So in many of these things, I'm sort of reliving my own little nightmares and the scenarios that I have in my head. But that said, this is how I watch scary stories. I am the biggest chicken ever. I do not like extreme horror or too much body horror. So I tend to make my things spooky and creepy, but not too terrifying. And usually people will survive at the end. I don't kill everybody off at the end. So I am the biggest chicken. And so, but I do love spooky, creepy stories. And so I'm trying to always sort of thread that needle, walk that line.
No, that's true for me as well. I don't like horror. That's the one thing that I avoid. But yeah, that's great. Great ways to get your ideas there. All right, Donna, I love the title of your recent book, The Living Color. So when you hear living color, well, for me, I think of the colors are bright, nature, and green, the trees, I don't know, spring, flowers. That's what the living color means, a life in nature. But what does it mean for you?
Well, in this story, it refers to skin color, living as a person of color. And I think that when you read the stories, I think anybody who reads the stories will be able to relate some way to this character and to the situations she finds herself in, because who among us hasn't at some point in our lives been the outsider, said the wrong thing, wore the wrong clothes, just did something wrong that called attention to ourselves when we didn't want to be noticed, or to be noticed in that way. So we've all experienced that humiliation in front of our peers. But for Angie, there's a specific dimension to her experience in those situations, and that is her skin color. And so what I wanted to get across in these stories, and also through the title, is that people of color live their color. And so it's not something that we hide, it's not something that we can hide, it's something that people see and they respond to it. They react to it in different ways. And that affects how we see ourselves as well. And so that's basically what this title for me means. But there is a story in here in the later part of the book called Guided Tours in Living Color, which is when Angie, as part of her high school field trip, they go to a museum and they're expected to write about certain pieces of art. And what she realizes is that, she's looking at Western art, because this is what they're taught, this is what we're taught in school. And that there are things beyond Western art that we need to know about. And so one of the things that she does in trying to respond to this art, and also in terms of writing, their assignment is to write an autobiography as 16-year-olds, which is difficult when you've lived such a short time. But she starts to imagine different parts of her life as different colors. And so she associates a particular color with a particular event. And I think this is something that we often do ourselves. So that's another aspect of this title. But I think the main one is basically how we live as people of color, and especially as Angie, as a girl of color trying to figure out where she fits in the world.
Well, right. Yeah, that's a different way of putting things. I always think of nature, because on one side of me, it's all about nature and outdoors. And so, just like Anna, who's also likes a little bit of the nature and gets ideas from that. I also like the nature. It's very relaxing, actually. All right. So, Gloria, I want to go with you with a question, because your books focused a lot on Mexican culture and tradition. And so what are some of those future projects that you have in mind for later books? I know right now with the Calaveritas, I actually, I'm originally from Guanajuato, Mexico, where it's in the center of the country, somewhere there. And so we used to do in school Calaveritas, which is what you mentioned, which are basically pieces of rhyme or poems. And so they were all interesting, related to kind of like the Day of the Dead and things like that. So what are your future projects?
Yeah. Well, actually, as you mentioned in my presentation, and it was a book I should have focused on, I am publishing probably during these weeks a book on La Loteria, the origin, and it has to do a lot with this current work, the book I presented, because as I say before, Posada, who actually was from Guanajuato, he was one of the first creators of the Loteria, which is the Mexican bingo. So I am working, just finishing the bilingual edition of this book on La Loteria. I address many things. Something I am very interested, and I believe that most of us women are addressing the characters. In my particular case of La Loteria, there are 9 characters, and 2 of them are women. and I addressing these characters from a gender and racial perspective. Actually, I started researching on La Loteria, where do the images of La Loteria, the Mexican bingo, come? Because I don't know if you are familiar, well, I know that you are, Ana, but I don't know about the rest, but there is a card that is El Negrito. So as a Spanish language instructor, I used to naively bring the card, and I noticed that it caused a lot of discomfort in my students. I used to teach at USC. And then I realized, well, that actually is a stereotype of a black man. So I decided to go ahead and, first of all, take away El Negrito from my deck, and then to study why do we have that character. And then during those years in the exposition, I used to teach at USC, and there is an African American museum, and they had an exhibit on the African roots of Mexico, and then it was they displayed the card of El Negrito. So I say, well, maybe I can bring it and then just explain the context, because actually it was a very good opportunity to talk about the African heritage in Mexico that is frequently overlooked, Mexico and Central America, because it was part of the New Spain. So I decided to, in this book of La Loteria, to research on how these 9 characters that belong to different races and castas, they represent the caste system that prevailed in not only in Mexico, but in Latin America and even in Brazil for 500 years, which is a system that classifies each individual according to the race. So that's why actually a lot of the casta sistema de castas comes from the Portuguese, because they introduced the slavery in the Americas. So I decided to study each character of La Loteria from a gender and racial perspective, and then explain why do we have all those 54 images that again date back to medieval Europe. So that's what I'm working on.
Wow, well, that's a lot of history there. I have to look back a couple years, but that's a great project, because sometimes, me, for example, growing up, I would see everything like normal. I never thought about anything until I started getting introduced into classes, the college classes, where they teach you the real history. And so that's when you start opening your mind to new perspectives. All right, let me go with Anna. So in regards to your book, since you introduced, I don't know, you mentioned that the fact that, you didn't see the characters reflected in the books and all of that, but I noticed on your most recent book, the Lia Luis, you included words in Portuguese. So do you make available these books, or do you know if your books are available in other countries, or how about bilingual school programs where they can actually start learning about Portuguese and English?
So Unfortunately, I don't have a say, right? Where it's going to be published or where it's going to be sold to or anything like that, or translations and etc. But I do know that some of my books, I have a series called My Emotions in Me, and that one was translated to Turkish. And I know that Hello Tree is being translated to Chinese. And will be available in Taiwan and I don't think mainland China, but other places. Lia Luis is not, as far as I know, available in other countries, but Charles Bridge did prepare an activity guide, and they have the activity guide in both English and Portuguese. And there is a bilingual or maybe trilingual version coming out in April. So it's an English-Spanish version, but it still has some of the Portuguese sprinkled words in there. And the same should happen to the sequel. There's going to be a sequel to Lia Luis. It's called Lia Luis Puzzled. It's coming out in the fall. And I imagine that they're also going to be translating the activity guides to Portuguese. And they're also going to be translating the book to Spanish. So they will have the bilingual edition available. One thing that I did when Lia Luis came out was that I made a very extensive list of all the schools that teach Portuguese. There are certain parts of the country where there are a lot of Brazilian immigrants and sometimes Portuguese immigrants as well. And so I contacted all these schools and let them know about the Lia Luis book. And so hopefully they ordered some, and their students who are in the immersive English Portuguese programs can share with their parents, right? Because not a lot of times the parents don't speak the language that the kids are immersing themselves into. So anyway, yeah. So hopefully it will be available in other countries, but right now, as far as I know, Lia Luis is only available in the US, but it will be available in English and in a bilingual edition starting April of 2022.
All right. So you mentioned something very interesting as you were speaking, and that's that some publishers, especially bigger ones, they have a say on everything, and the author stays back. And so one of those things that you made your research about the schools because you knew that part of your audience was a Portuguese speaking audience, because this is who your book connects to. And I know sometimes, you know, when we, especially in our programming, we use the word bilingual, but bilingual doesn't necessarily mean English and Spanish, which is the main two languages that we deal with. It could mean any two other language. It doesn't have to include any of those language at all. And so, yeah, I think it's really hard when we speak about the word bilingual now that I think about it, because we have to be more specific.
But I think people usually assume English and Spanish. That's correct. But I have to say that, yes, it's true that with a bigger publisher, you don't have, there is a lot that is decided by the publisher. But in this case, in terms of translation and publishing in other countries, it depends on, especially publishing other countries, it depends on that country. That country must have an interest in that topic to think that book is going to sell in that country. And so I think that's why, you don't always know where your book is going to sell. I would never have imagined that the My Emotions in Me series would be translated to Turkish, right? But they found that their audience would be interested in the book. So I think it's okay sometimes to let other people worry about these things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anything else anybody from the speakers would like to add to each other's conversations? I know that we had some viewers, and so thank you for watching this presentation, this session. Thank you for being here. one of the things that I know is that one of the viewers was asking in regards to, you know, first-time authors. So all of you are multi-book authors because you have written more than one book. What is it that, I guess, some brief advice for those first-timers, because you already experienced publishing your first book, but how about the new authors that are coming out? What would you recommend? Anna, would you like to start?
Sure. In my case, it was all about, I joined an organization that is specialized in books for children. And when I did it, I noticed that there was still a lot that I needed to learn that I really didn't know. And so in my opinion, one thing is really getting to know the market, but never lose yourself in it. So make sure that what you're writing is coming from your heart. And even though you need to learn the market, I don't think that you have to have the market as the main, you don't have to please necessarily the market. You just have to write for yourself, write what comes from your heart, but make sure that you understand the market, you understand the craft so that you can explore different publishing options. That's my advice, but I can only talk about children's publishing. So.
Oh, that's true. That's true. Deborah, do you have any advice for first-time authors or anything in general?
Yes. So I never thought that I could possibly write a book. And this is even after writing every single day as a journalist and editing other people's copy, because it seemed like such a foreign world. And I didn't grow up seeing other authors of color, very many. So I would say believe in yourself, write as much as you can, try and write every day, read widely, figure out what makes you happy to write, and read lots of books on craft. There's wonderful books on everything from, you know, plot and structure and storyline to how to craft dialogue and make it interesting and make it sing. There's every kind of craft book out there. And so read widely, but one has to approach it with a little bit of discipline. So one thing as a journalist is I'm really good at sitting down and not getting up until the work is done, because I'll tell you something, and especially with newscasts, no matter what happens, you're putting on the 5 o'clock newscast, 6 o'clock newscast. It doesn't matter if the world just collapsed, you're on the air. So I tend to personally approach my deadlines with that kind of drop dead respect. And so I think that the more that you take the work seriously, the better you are. The last thing we'll say is there's so many different avenues to publication today that didn't exist. So there's the traditionally publishing route. You can try and get an agent and try and go to a big publisher. There's smaller independent publishing houses. And then there's the self-publishing route. If I'd started my journey as a writer 20 years ago, I would have probably gone the traditional route. But at my age and my stage, I don't have the ramp of 5-7 years of trying to look for an agent and trying to get a deal. I'm also a control freak. And so it's wonderful for people who want to control their stories, choose what kind of stories they tell, how often they publish, what their covers are going to look like, what their blurbs are going to look like. And then there's the whole marketing aspect, which is another beast in itself. So if you are entrepreneurial as you are much a writer, then I think self-publishing is becoming a much more viable option. And so awards like from Empowering Latinos is meaningful to everyone who gets an award. But it is just wonderful for self-published or independent authors like myself.
All right. Well, thank you for that. Discipline. All right. Donna, would you like to share something?
Yeah, I think Deborah covered a lot. I'm going to touch on something that sort of the sad side of being a writer, and that is rejection. I just recently wrote a blog post about rejection and acceptance. And I think that just understanding that rejection is part of being a writer, that, you have to steel yourself for that. And you have to persevere through it, because not everybody's going to like your writing, or not everybody's going to have the space to publish your writing. So you just have to keep going. And I think that the other thing that really helps is to find a writing community that you can support and they can be supportive of you, because I think those are the kinds of things that help you sustain yourself as a writer during the bad times when nobody seems to be interested in your work. And I really agree with Deborah's comment about discipline. I feel that has been what has gotten me through these years of writing, because there are times when I felt that, I was getting a lot of rejections, but the fact that I was writing was the thing that was important to me. And I used to think, well, if I never got published, I would still be writing. And I still think that would be true. Although I think it would still be hard at my age to be saying that. But I think that just the very act of creating something is in itself a reward. So.
Well, yeah, that's true. And we all gonna see some kind of rejections in our lives, but just keep going and continue writing. Gloria, do you have any advice, final thoughts?
Yes, well, they have say pretty much everything, but first of all, to have something to say, that's very important. And not to be too ambitious, because of course, if you write a very big book, you deal with more characters and there is more possibility of confusion. I mean, and more if it's your first work, in the case that is a novel. And last but not least, I want to point out that it's very important that we submit our work with good grammar, because I have a lot of friends, very talented friends, that have written beautiful children's books, but it's plagued with grammar mistakes. And then I say, well, this is your the first impression. Even those are mechanical errors. Okay, if you are not good at grammar, okay, give it to somebody else. But it's important. Of course, it's important to say something, but it's important also how to say the presentation. So I will add that.
Wow. Well, that's great addition to this. And so I know we could go on and on, but time has run out, unfortunately. I was very happy to have all of you here. Thank you very much. And so you're welcome to stay for our next session. If not, you are happy to just come back later. We're going to have more sessions too.
Thank you so much, Anna.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Yes. So at this point, I would like to highlight one of our key partners to making the Latino Book and Family Festival a great event. So that will be Energy Upgrade California. It's a statewide initiative committed to helping Californians be more energy efficient and reduce demand on the energy grid. So keep it golden to better manage your energy use for the future of California. More information at energyupgradecalifornia.org.